Hello and welcome to Grim Wander. I am, as always, your host, Edward. As you may have noticed, I've been struggling to get my videos out consistently and on time, particularly over the last few weeks. I'd like to talk about why, and maybe give you a little clearer look at who I am, the real me, if you like. As part of this discussion today, I'm going to talk about some things that are, to be honest, very hard to talk about, and my natural tendency is to emotionally distance myself as I'm doing that. I'm going to try to avoid that, but no promises. Let's see how it goes. Let's start by defining three terms which are central to our discussion. It goes without saying, but I've listed the sources at the end of the video and in the description on YouTube. So the first thing I want to define is depression. Depression can be defined as the loss of interest or pleasure. It is associated with disturbed sleep, low energy, and poor focus or concentration. To be clear, it's not the same as feeling sad. This depression isn't tied to a specific event or an instance that triggers the feeling, and it doesn't go away on its own. It lingers with you. For example, and this is one of those things I told you it's very hard to talk about, there have been multiple points in my life when I've sat with a knife to my wrist and wanted to end it all. And when I was afraid to do it, when I couldn't bring myself to do it, I condemned myself for being a coward. The second term I'd like to talk about is low self-esteem, which is the lack of confidence in ourselves and our abilities. We feel less able, to use the NHS's euphemism, to take on the challenges that life throws at us. As an example of low self-esteem in my life, a couple of years back, I got serious about my weight and started going to the gym and kept being careful with my nutrition. And I lost a good amount of weight within about 6 or 8 months. Even when I reached my weight loss goal, however, all I could see in myself was how ugly I perceived myself to be. Sure, it's nice that people would compliment me, oh, you've lost so much weight, yada yada. But when I looked in the mirror, all I could see was the crooked nose, the kind of bland face, the extra skin from having lost the weight, and of course the all too visible signs of aging, which, as I've talked to you about before, I really hate. All of that made it very hard to keep up with my regime, and as I have in the past, I've gained back almost all of the weight that I'd lost 2 years ago. The third thing I want to talk about is introversion. Unlike the first two things we talked about, introversion is not, in and of itself, a problem, nor is it the same as being shy, although people often confuse them. Personally, I like the definition offered by Carl Jung and others, which says that extroversion is getting energy and motivation from the outside world, actions, if you will, and introversion is getting them from the inner world. Everyone in this theory has both an introverted and extroverted side, but for most people there's a dominance to one side or the other. And as I've said, neither being introverted or extroverted is by itself a problem. But sometimes a strong introverted or extroverted personality can feed into other problems a person has, and that's been the case with me in the low self-esteem and the depression. An example of introversion as it applies to me. My job requires me to wear a very extroverted personality, a mask. I can do it, and I think that most people I work with would be surprised by how much of an introvert I am. So I can do it, but it's very draining. Once the workday, or whatever reason I'm having to be in that introverted mindset, is done, I collapse. I have to just get away from everyone, including my husband. I go into the spare room usually. I will close the door. I will sometimes sit in the dark listening to music. Whatever I need to do, it just being alone helps me rebuild my energy and get back up. So what do these traits mean? And perhaps more importantly to our conversation, how do they play out and interact with each other and me? First, these factors together have made it very hard for me to connect with other people. Seldom in my life have I ever had more than a handful of friends, and even they, in my opinion, never really knew me. They only knew the parts of myself I let them see, which is very much a mask. And at least partly due to the way I was raised, as we've talked about before, I moved a lot growing up. I have a very hard time maintaining friendships and relationships. When I'm in a position where someone is no longer in my daily life, I have a hard time sustaining and feeding that friendship. It's not intentional, and I've lost track of some wonderful people who I wish were still part of my life. But at the same time, I've come to accept that about myself, that it's just something that is. Next, in some situations, driving being a very big one, I get extremely upset. My husband and I joke about my having road rage, but in honesty, it really isn't a joke. I get extremely stressed and aggravated when I'm driving, which unfortunately my day job requires me to do quite a bit. I tend to fight myself and my own goals, or perhaps I should say I struggle to keep my impulses from derailing my long-term goals. This is very true with money, it's very true with weight and diet, and it's very true with sleep. I have a tendency to obsess about just one thing for a while. I pour everything into it, and then eventually run out of energy for it and just stop. Whether it's exercise or diet or playing video games or even doing YouTube. I run very hot and then very cold. Again, I try to joke about this, as I do with a lot of things, and say I've only have two speeds, 100% on and completely off. But again, it's a joke that isn't, because this is really just a way for what's going on inside to be expressed outside. Having said that, having that one thing I can get OCD, for lack of a better term, about does help in some ways. At least it gives me an outlet or a focus, something to think about outside of myself and my own thoughts. But well-meaning people are constantly telling me to slow down, stop pushing myself too hard, and that just feeds into my other tendency to just turn completely off and just stop. So what am I doing about all this? In the past, I have tried therapy as well as support groups, and as I've talked about in other videos, it has helped with specific issues and situations. Probably the most obvious example is when I was first diagnosed with HIV. I've talked about how helpful it was at that time to get the therapy and go to the support groups. But in honesty, the underlying issues are still there, and they are still affecting my life after that therapy and those support groups ended. I've tried exercise, as it's been suggested by various people that can help you deal with depression. But while exercise gives you an endorphin rush, that lasts a few minutes after your workout, and in my experience it doesn't really help with those core underlying issues. As I've mentioned in previous videos, I tried for years to self-medicate with alcohol and compensate for my lack of self-esteem by having sex. Neither, of course, proved to be a solution. A year ago, after much nagging by my husband, I did something which I had resisted for a long time, and that is I started taking an antidepressant. In fairness, it did help blunt the symptoms. The valleys when I would get depressed weren't quite as low. But there are other side effects, and the medication isn't really a fix for anything. So when I started weaning myself off them in September, those valleys were right there waiting just as deep as they'd ever been. So where do I go from here? To be honest, I really don't know. I'm just trying to get through every day as it comes, just trying to keep my head above water for now, and hopefully I'll find a solution eventually. I do think that posting here on YouTube has helped. It's been both that one thing that I focus on, my OCD subject, for a while, but also it's kind of my therapy as well, and it gives me a chance to talk through some of those things going on inside my head. That said, I still don't think I've let you see all the way in yet, that real me that I had promised. But I promise I am trying. So is this something that you're struggling with, or that someone you know is struggling with? Is there something that you or they have done that has helped? Please share in the comments below, as I think these issues are much more common than we want to admit, and your suggestion might help me or someone else who's reading the comments, so please do share. In the meantime, thank you very much for being my therapist today and for listening to me ramble. As a scheduling note, this week is a very sad anniversary for me, and I'll be back on Wednesday to talk about that. In the meanwhile, be good. And if you can't be good, be wicked well.